I think with us it went on. I mean, it went in Liverpool, we were a club band, and suddenly we did a theatre. That was like a step.
For decades, the world has tried to piece together what really happened behind the scenes of the most legendary band in music history. While fans clung to interviews, documentaries, and cryptic lyrics, one voice remained curiously quiet. The man who kept the beat stayed out of the noise until now. From unexpected regrets to a jaw-dropping offer the band turned down, Ringo opens the vault on moments that shaped and nearly shattered the Beatles. But it's how he tells it, and why he chose to speak now, that will leave you stunned. Get ready to see the Fab Four through a lens you've never heard before. One filled with honesty, laughter, and something no one saw coming. Because when Ringo speaks, the world listens. From Richard Starkey to Ringo Starr. Richard Starkey's childhood was marked by severe illnesses. He battled peritonitis at the age of 6, spending months in the hospital, and later suffered from tuberculosis, which kept him away from school for long periods. Despite these setbacks, Richard developed an enduring sense of resilience and humor, traits that would later define his public persona. His early experiences taught him to appreciate life and music in simple, profound ways. As he grew older and began playing drums in local Liverpool bands like Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, Richard Starkey started to craft a stage identity to match the growing excitement around rock and roll. He adopted the name Ringo Starr. Ringo for his habit of wearing multiple rings on his fingers, and Starr to give himself a touch of cowboy glamour, inspired by his love for Western movies. The name was distinctive and instantly memorable, setting him apart from the simpler, more traditional names of his future bandmates, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and George Harrison. Ringo's addition to the Beatles in 1962 completed the classic lineup of the band, but the adjustment was not easy. While the other members quickly established a very strong creative partnership, Ringo's early attempts at songwriting led to mild teasing. He would sometimes set lyrics to an existing melody, amusing John, Paul, and George to no end. Instead of getting discouraged, Ringo rather took to his own path of humor, humility, and a sprinkle of cheeky obstinacy that won him the affection of not only the band, but eventually millions of fans around the globe. Throughout Ringo's tenure with the Beatles, he saw himself with a heavy dose of self-deprecating humor, and never referred to himself as the technical virtuoso of the band. Rather, he considered himself the steady, reliable beat behind their success. It is this unpretentiousness that helped him charm his way into solo projects and even acting roles with ease after the band broke up. From a sickly child in Liverpool to the most lovable drummer in history, Ringo has been an object lesson in endurance, character, and a distinctive kind of charisma that is more than capable of shining without any flash. Just as Ringo found his rhythm behind the kit, stepping into the world's biggest band would test more than just his timing. Joining the Beatles. When Ringo Starr first joined the Beatles in 1962, it wasn't under ideal circumstances. Pete Best, the band's original drummer, had been suddenly dismissed, and early fans weren't shy about voicing their displeasure. At those first gigs, Ringo often faced open hostility from audiences who shouted, "Where's Pete?" and sometimes even booed. Yet Ringo never let the negativity rattle him. He simply kept drumming, steady, sure, and unshakable. What many didn't realize then was that Ringo's arrival marked a silent revolution inside the band. His clean, instinctive style of playing and his easygoing nature acted like a balm on the tensions brewing between John, Paul, and George. While outsiders fixated on the change, the Beatles themselves knew almost immediately that they had found their perfect final member. What set Ringo apart wasn't just technical ability, though he was an excellent, inventive drummer. It was the feel he brought, a swing, a looseness, a natural human tempo that elevated the Beatles' sound from good to transcendent. "I am the click," he once famously told producer Jeff Lynne, rejecting the idea of playing to a mechanical beat. Ringo's timing was so solid that he didn't need technological aids. He was the heartbeat that kept the music alive. His style wasn't flashy. It was subtle, fluid, and song-focused. Whether it was the playful bounce of "I Want to Hold Your Hand" or the laid-back lilt of "Come Together," Ringo's drumming had an intuitive sense of what each song needed. No more, no less. In a band full of larger-than-life egos and shifting creative visions, he became the steady hand that allowed the others to stretch, clash, and ultimately create without falling apart. Besides the music itself, it was also Ringo's character that altered the group's dynamic in a way that was equally important. If John could be sharp, and Paul could be driven, and George could somehow sulk silently, then Ringo had humor, levity, and the kind of working-class humility that grounded the band. He could take himself very rarely seriously, which was good for relieving some of the pressure pushed by fame and rivalries. New members sometimes become timid or defensive during their first phase, but not Ringo. Rather, here he was, entering the storm with geniality and humor and a very steadied sense of self. The others, he quickly fell into that indefinable chemistry, which, after a few months, ensured that both the fans and the critics would accept him not just as the drummer, but also as part of their magic. By the time Beatlemania started, any last whispers about his actual position in the band had long since dissipated. His charm and wit were paired with unique drumming to woo fans completely. More than just the keeper of rhythm, he was soon to be hailed as a part of the band's approachable, mischievous nature. During their interviews, when they were joking around or mugging to the cameras, Ringo was the one stealing the show with the just right quip or clever grin. More often than not, his presence is now easily taken for granted, but history makes it clear. Without Ringo, the Beatles would have lacked a critical part of their soul. The hidden tensions within the Beatles. While the world saw the Beatles as a perfect unit of musical harmony, Ringo Starr has candidly revealed that life inside the band was far messier than fans might have believed. Speaking recently to Dan Rather, Ringo admitted bluntly, No, we didn't get along. We were four guys. We had rows." Far from the polished image projected to the public, behind the scenes, there were frequent clashes of personality, ambition, and creative direction. Yet even amid the arguments, bruised egos, and growing personal lives pulling them in different directions, there was one sacred space they all respected: the music. Once the count in, Ringo emphasized, we all gave our best. No matter how heated the arguments became, when it came time to record, their shared love for creating magic took over, and every Beatle poured everything into the songs that would become timeless. One major source of both brilliance and strain, Ringo acknowledged, was Paul McCartney's relentless work ethic. Calling Paul the workaholic of the group, Ringo reflected that without Paul's constant push, the Beatles simply wouldn't have been as prolific. Because of Paul, we made a lot more records than John and I would have made, he confessed with a laugh. While John and Ringo preferred to relax and take things more casually, it was Paul's frequent calls, "All right, lads," that pulled them back into the studio. That drive led to an astonishing output of 12 studio albums in just 7 years, an achievement that remains unmatched to this day. But as much as it fueled their success, Paul's unstoppable energy also intensified the pressure within the group, contributing to the emotional wear and tear that eventually fractured their bond. Underneath the glitzy surface of Beatlemania, each of the four members had to deal with their own frustrations, rivalries, and insecurities. George Harrison later made feelings of deep animosity clear towards John Lennon in interviews, referring to him at times as negative and nasty. The cracks which appeared toward the latter part of the group life, especially around the time of Sgt. Pepper's and the White Album, were not merely artistic differences, but also personal ones. Still, as Ringo emphasized, the band had this strange chemistry that lasted till the very end. Their songs were enriched because of this balancing act of brotherhood and ego, of love and competition. It was a thin line they walked for as long as they could, but personal ambition and the weight of success came crashing down on them. The unsung hero. While John, Paul, and George often captured headlines with their songwriting and innovation, it was Ringo Starr's quiet mastery behind the drum kit that truly anchored the Beatles' sound. From the earliest sessions, Ringo understood an essential truth. His job wasn't to show off, it was to serve the song. He never overloaded a track with unnecessary fills or tried to dominate a recording. Instead, he provided a steady, tasteful foundation that allowed the others to build their soaring melodies and intricate harmonies. His ability to subtly adapt to the changing moods of their music, from the raw energy of their early hits to the layered complexity of later albums, became one of the band's most overlooked but vital strengths. Over time, what Ringo brought to the Beatles became clearer to those who listened closely. His timing was impeccable, and his restraint was a rare discipline in an era when many drummers favored flashy performances. Ringo had a gift for giving a song exactly what it needed. No more, no less. His intuitive use of space, rhythm, and tone created a kind of emotional scaffolding around which the Beatles' songs could breathe and evolve. Today, countless drummers study his techniques, admiring not just his technical skill, but the musical wisdom behind every beat and cymbal crash. Yet during the Beatles' prime, much of this brilliance remained quietly uncelebrated, even as it formed the heartbeat of some of the most beloved songs in history. Ringo was the emotional and musical glue holding the group together, while his bandmates often strayed far from the traditional to make their own bold artistic statements. Whenever one of them pushed the boundaries of creativity, Ringo's presence offered a calming and stabilizing influence without ever seeming to interfere. His quirky rhythms guided the band's evolution from rock to pop, from psychedelia to the cusp of country and blues, with a finesse little appreciated in that era. His main gift seemed to be in making the difficult appear so simple, thereby accentuating the many flashier moments of the others against his stable, reassuring backdrop. In many respects, Ringo Starr was the real secret weapon for the band. Never the loudest voice, never the flashiest player, but always the indispensable force holding everything together. His humility allowed him to blend in with the band, and yet his musical instincts quietly determined the emotional landscape of the Beatles' music. Without his sense of timing, his feel for when to hold back or drive forward, so many of the Beatles' signature hits would have lost their depth and impact. Though history may too often relegate him to the background, those who really know understand that Ringo never just kept time, he helped define it. The Shark Incident. In 1976, 6 years after the Beatles had played their final rooftop concert, an offer came that could have changed music history. A television executive named Bill Sargent put $50 million on the table for a one-time Beatles reunion, a number so outrageous for the era that it immediately caught everyone's attention. It briefly raised the possibility that the four former bandmates might share a stage once more, despite the years of distance and growing solo careers. For a fleeting moment, the idea of seeing John, Paul, George, and Ringo together again seemed almost within reach. However, buried within the extravagant proposal was an idea so absurd that it made the reunion impossible. The problem wasn't just the money, it was the spectacle. Sargent wanted the concert to open with a man wrestling a live great white shark, an act designed to shock and grab headlines. The band members, when discussing it privately, agreed that it crossed a line they weren't willing to touch. It wasn't just distasteful, it was beneath them. No amount of money could convince them to take the stage after such a grim, bizarre scene. For the Beatles, who had built their career on musical innovation and authenticity, the very thought of linking their legacy to a circus act was a deal-breaker. This moment revealed a deeper truth about who the Beatles were and what they stood for even after their breakup. Unlike many artists who might have been tempted by the massive payday or the publicity, the Beatles maintained a fundamental respect for their art and their audience. They understood that their music represented more than entertainment. It was tied to a moment in culture, a spirit of change and creativity that deserved to be honored, not cheapened. Even separated by personal differences and time, the members instinctively chose dignity over spectacle, proving once again that their integrity mattered just as much as their fame. That really bittersweet moment for Ringo was the conversation about the reunion. This was the time when he still had faith that maybe someday, sooner or later, the Beatles would find a way to come together, maybe even just for a few minutes. The end of Abbey Road hadn't been a final goodbye. In later reflections, he said he was sure that if John and George had survived, the chance for this reunion would have eventually come. Although history closed the door to that reunion in a different way, the shark incident today stands as an unusual but powerful symbol of the Beatles' commitment to the high purpose of their music, a purpose they would not betray, whatever the cost. The $50 million offer was merely another footnote in the history of the Beatles' interesting "what might have been" that speaks volumes about who they were. For others, dollar signs may dance around their heads at the thought of what $50 million would do as income from one gigantic reunion concert. The Beatles, however, were aware of the danger of making their art into a spectacle. Their walking away was not simply turning down one outrageous idea. It was a denial of money, fame, or even nostalgia, writing a new script for who they were. Walking away from the spotlight didn't mean the story was over. In fact, part of it was only just beginning. Why Ringo Starr is speaking now. For much of his life, Ringo Starr stayed quiet about the more turbulent, behind-the-scenes moments of the Beatles' journey. While fans and historians dissected every smile, every sidelong glance, Ringo chose instead to focus on the music and the simple message of peace and love. But now, at 84, he feels the time has finally come to break his silence. Sitting in a West Hollywood bungalow, still lively and quick-witted, Ringo reflects that growing older has sharpened his memories and softened his urge to protect old wounds. You rewind to a space that was happy, and then you go forward, he says, describing the philosophy behind his new extended play EP, Rewind Forward. It's a motto that now defines his willingness to revisit the past, not to stir controversy, but to honor the truth before it fades into myth. As Ringo explains it, the decision to speak up wasn't fueled by bitterness or regret, but rather by a sense of personal duty. In the early days, when Beatlemania spun their world into chaos, there was no time to process anything. Survival meant moving forward without pause. It got bigger and crazier, he recalls, marveling even now at the tidal wave of fame that overtook them. Yet, looking back across 60 years, from their first American television appearance to today's complex debates over AI music technology, Ringo feels a certain responsibility to set the record straight, not just for his bandmates, but for himself. "Paul loves me as much as I love him," he says warmly, speaking of their lifelong bond. No nonsense reflection on that different kind of rock icon. Ringo's refractions are humorous, even modest, as he jokes about being the glue in the Beatles. Obviously, the one who didn't feud, but just played his drums. Even painful memories, such as that notorious 1963 interview where he cheekily stated he would be a hairdresser after the end of music, a line he still keeps getting teased over, are approached with a smile, not from an angle of resentment. "We all went mad at different times," he admits. Yet still, he insists that when tensions boiled over, the music was never compromised. Once the count in, we all gave our best. In this way, Ringo reaffirms that it's okay to be human, to be fallible, to the end for the Beatles. The music was sacred. Having helped finish the last Beatles song, Now and Then, using new technology, but built on John Lennon's uncut vocals, he viewed the recording as such. A nice way, finally, to close that door. Closing the door does not mean forgetting. It means keeping alive the joy and chaos, the love and commitment that defined a generation. We loved to work well. Paul loved to work more than all of us. Ringo chuckles. Without Paul working that hard, he admits, they probably would have only managed to get 3 albums done before they disappeared. Brotherhood beyond the music. Even after decades of fame, awards, and reinventions, Ringo Starr still speaks about his Beatles bandmates with a sense of awe and tenderness that transcends time. In recent conversations, he's opened up about how deeply the losses of John Lennon and George Harrison affected him, not just as a fellow musician, but as someone who saw them as family. Their deaths were not abstract tragedies. They were personal, piercing moments of grief. Ringo has often said that the bond they shared, forged in their chaotic early 20s and solidified through years of creative intensity, was something few people could ever truly understand. Losing John was like losing a brother, and losing George, who had been a quiet but constant presence in his life, left a space no one else could fill. Paul McCartney, meanwhile, has remained a steady part of Ringo's world, not just as a friend, but as a creative partner whose presence still lights up the stage. When the two reunited at London's O2 Arena in late 2024 for their first performance together in 5 years, the moment felt more like a family gathering than a public concert. The way Paul welcomed Ringo on stage with a simple, joyful, "Shall we rock?" captured their enduring chemistry. Their continued collaborations, whether live or in the studio, feel less like nostalgia and more like a celebration of everything they've managed to hold on to. For Ringo, sharing the stage with Paul isn't just about playing music. It's about reconnecting with the spirit of their shared history and honoring what remains. Over the years, Ringo has said that they fought quite a bit amongst others, and sometimes there were stormy disagreements between men at different stages in their lives. But with an array of misunderstandings and frustrations, a bond was entrenched deep. It was an easy way for him to describe it. Their love, he said, was always bigger than their arguments. This is an emotion that speaks not only of nostalgia, but wisdom. Wisdom such as that which comes after timeless and loss-enduring. The Beatles were not just a band. They were a brotherhood, as understood by all the faults and loyalties and forgiveness, which that word implies. His stage name, Ringo Starr, even reminds him of how he was so distinct and yet so inseparable from the group. It's been joked about that while John, Paul, and George made all perfect sense as a band, Ringo always sounded odd, like a character from a different story, they say. But this fault is also part of the band's charm. Ringo's humor, warmth, and easy rhythm gave the group's musicality and friendships balance. He may have played drums, but in many ways, he is at the heart, always keeping the time, always showing up. And now, with only 2 of the 4 remaining, it weighs heavily on Ringo's reflections as those of a loved, lost, and cherished every laugh and show in the notes they have shared together. The AI controversy. When Now and Then was finally released in 2023, it stirred immediate excitement and controversy in equal measure. Originally recorded as a rough demo by John Lennon in the late 1970s, the track had long been considered a lost gem, impossible to properly complete because of poor recording quality. Advances in technology, specifically the use of AI-driven audio tools developed during Peter Jackson's Get Back project, made it possible to isolate Lennon's vocals cleanly from the original tape. For the first time, Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr could return to the unfinished song and build around it, creating what many now call the Beatles' final recording. Yet even as the track was celebrated, its release sparked passionate debates about the role of artificial intelligence in preserving or altering artistic legacies. Ringo Starr, reflecting on the project, expressed a mixture of pride and caution. He was deeply moved to finally see Now and Then completed, knowing how long it had lingered in an unfinished state, and proud that the band's original spirit could shine through once more. But at the same time, Ringo shared a quiet wariness about what AI could mean for the future of music. Technology had been a tool in this case, helping to recover something authentic that might otherwise have remained trapped in the past. However, he recognized that it was a fine line between restoration and fabrication, a line that future generations might be more tempted to cross. No artificial remaking or manufactured fantasy, just the fact that it haunts Ringo. Now and Then was a true Beatles song. It was a flavorful project at its heart, which, despite controversies and misunderstandings, was simple and straightforward, to isolate and enrich the original voice of John Lennon without replacing it. That is, clarified McCartney, that no artificial elements were created. All that is heard on the track, finally, was based on the work of the original Beatles, carefully polished using modern tools, yet very well firmly in real performances. Ringo's own contributions, drumming and harmonies, did link past and current time in what could be termed a manner that felt natural rather than engineered. The introduction to Now and Then would finally prove how the magic of the Beatles lives and bequeaths, winning Best Rock Performance at the 2024 Grammy Awards. Sean Ono Lennon, son of John for the band, received the award, a very emotional moment that reminded us that technology assisted but never replaced human connections at the heart of music. The irony is that for Ringo, to finish Now and Then was not only about modern technology, but also about honoring a friendship, a legacy, a voice which deserved to be heard, real, imperfect, and full of life. Reactions to the future. News of Sam Mendes' ambitious plan to direct 4 individual Beatles biopics, one for each member of the band, was met with a mixture of excitement and skepticism. For the first time, the Beatles record company, Apple, and the 2 surviving members, Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr, granted full rights for a cinematic portrayal of their story. Mendes promised something immersive and expansive, a theatrical binge experience meant to offer deeper insight into each Beatles' personal arc. When the casting was revealed, the films were officially greenlit for release in 2028, and while many applauded the creative ambition, others began questioning the choice of actors who had no direct ties to Liverpool, the birthplace of the band's sound and spirit. Always measured and gracious in the face of modern interpretations, Ringo Starr has greeted the announcement with curiosity and caution, excitement about the project, and an openness to see what Mendes does with such a vast narrative. He also commented on how difficult it is to not just portray the music, but also the cultural roots that made the Beatles who they were. Mendes has a strong resume and a lot of love for the band, but Ringo feels those little sidelights of Liverpool whimsical, working class, and with a very peculiar accent, are more than nuances. They make up a kind of DNA that shapes the worldview and voice of the band. Ringo, however, says he is not interested in gatekeeping or controlling the process of artistic creation. He is aware that times change, that interpretations get transformed, and that younger generations connect with stories differently. What is important to him is that the story's heart struggle, the bond, and the musical revolution are told carefully. While haircuts and accents may create an initial stir, Ringo hopes Mendes and his team will find the emotional truth below the veneer. Beyond the lights, scripts, and cinema buzz, Ringo's vision for their legacy reaches somewhere far more personal and timeless. Legacy and peace. As he reflects on his journey at 84, Ringo Starr isn't interested in rewriting history to fit a narrative of perfection. To him, the Beatles were never saints or untouchable icons. They were four young men who stumbled, laughed, argued, and grew up together while creating something extraordinary. What made them special wasn't just their music, but the imperfections behind it, the humanity that came through in every note. Ringo has often emphasized that their strength came not from being flawless, but from being real. They made mistakes, they took risks, and they didn't always know what they were doing. And that's exactly why the music still resonates. Ringo hopes that future generations will step beyond the pedestal and rediscover the curious spirit and creativity that were, at heart, the Beatles. He wants youth to not only listen to the hits, but, more importantly, to the weird stuff, the experiments, the happy digressions. From the straightforward charm of Love Me Do to the sound experimentalism of Tomorrow Never Knows, they were never afraid to try anything new. That is the kind of legacy Ringo wants to live on. Not the mythological figure, but the message that it is okay to experiment, to collaborate, and to grow. Ringo is not looking at legacy for the sake of legacy. The Beatles are not a monument to him. It is a moment that changed things, yes, but one that can keep changing things if we allow it to. He wants it to serve as an impetus for action rather than being adored. More music, more creativity, and more kindness. Ringo carries the Beatles' spirit. Indeed, many torchbearers would agree. With much love and joy, be it while performing on stage, drumming alongside Paul, or smiling at fans waving peace and love signs. And as long as one of us, through the opportunity to catch a recording, a film, or song transferred generationally, lights the flame of that legacy, it will not be completely stamped out. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Ringo's reflections, don't forget to like, drop a comment with your favorite Beatles moment, and subscribe for more untold stories from music legends. And hey, don't go just yet. Click the next video on your screen to keep the journey going.